saying? Acha, हाँ, right.
Yeah, thank you.
May I request to kindly be seated so that we can start Dr. Wan's presentation?
Realize it's last session, and we'll try to certainly make it quick, not only for the reason it's late, but also because we got to really go to the airport, leaving at 6 o'clock. What I wanted to do is to take you through some research I did in the last couple of years, and we're end this presentation on the on a project which I hope will be relevant in the Indian context. But I will start with this 3 I's of G20 because this is one of the sessions under this G20 conference. And we heard a lot about investment. We heard some about implementation, but we haven't not really heard actual sessions on inclusiveness. And that's where this session is about. So to me, this is a very relevant session to this workshop. Of course, inequality, we all know, is very important. And on a global scale, most of us will know this publication of Pickley, which really stormed the whole world. But in Asia, we have been talking about this, and also in ADBI, we've been talking about this for years. And that's simply because of the fact inequality in Asia has been growing in most countries. If you look at this chart, these are the sort of Gini coefficient estimates in the 1990s and the latest estimates for different countries. You will see that for all these countries in the Asian Pacific region, for these countries, the Gini coefficients are becoming higher. Actually, I have another chart which I couldn't really fit because it's in a PDF file, shows the increases in Gini coefficient for different countries. But I think that's already a common knowledge. But it's not only really the inequality within countries. That's most of us are concerned. But for the region as a whole, you also need to really think about the inequality between different countries. So regional inequality would have inequalities within individual countries, but also inequality between different countries. And for Asia, now for the globe, actually, there are certain controversies. Some are saying the between country inequalities are declining because of the growth of China and India and so on. But within inequalities rising. So overall trend, it's a bit controversial. But for Asia, if you look at this chart, both within country inequalities and between country inequality are growing. So the region really is facing a serious problems with inequalities. That's why many countries in this region embracing this inclusive growth concept. I know India, also one of those countries, has been talking about inclusive growth for quite a long time. Indonesia and also China. In China, they call it harmonious growth and so on. But it's all really sort of targeting at this inequality issue. But we've been talking a lot. We've been measuring inequalities. But when it comes to solution, we've been talking about this for years. But we're not really seeing the declining in inequalities. Inequalities are growing in many countries. China, we see some declining, stabilization, being stable, but still not really declining significantly. So where are the solutions? Well, of course, if you can come up with a laundry list. The conventional wisdom is, of course, transfers, fiscal transfers. You take from the rich and give to the poor. And of course, we've been talking about jobs because the poor has nothing but labor. They don't have capital. So if you create jobs, the poor are likely to gain. That may not be necessary to look at India. The jobs goes to the IT professional. It doesn't really help the poor. So, and of course, we also talk about social protection. ADBI and ISCAP, they've been talking about asking member countries in Asia to increase their social protection spending to 2%. which is not a huge amount, but it's very difficult for the region. I think we're barely reaching 1% for Asia as a whole. So you can't really go on with that list, but so far, as I said, there's little impact. I mean, inequalities are growing. I think also in India, in Vietnam, China is stable, as I said. So the really issue is, we have this laundry list, but how do we do it? Who are we going to target, and where to start? And as a person working on inequality issues, I've been seeing the professional, the economists working in this area also is responsible because they have not been able to do proper concrete research. So I thought we need some analytical work, not really come down to do some number crunching. Well, it's actually the research part is not very difficult. I mean, it's easier to understand. If you look at national inequality or regional inequality, basically, particularly for a country, you can break down this whole inequality into three parts. You take urban as one area, you take rural as another area. Then, of course, you have inequalities within rural areas. You have inequality within urban areas. And, of course, you have a gap between urban and rural areas, right? So you have three parts. And this inequality, you can actually do a breakdown. So you have urban inequality plus rural inequality plus a gap between rural and urban areas. That's your national inequality. Now, we do that, and there's there are some modeling work you could do to actually show that this national inequality equals to these three components. And then based on that, you can do some mathematical manipulations, which I'm not really going to go through that. But I will show you some of the results. The first thing I want to show you is, as I mentioned, this whole inequality in the country can be broken down into three parts, right? The inequality within urban areas, inequality within rural areas, and then this gap between rural and urban areas. Now, in this chart, that's actually based on data from China. I add the inequality within rural areas to the inequality within urban areas. That's the red part. So red part is what we call within inequality. And the blue part is the between inequality, which is really due to the urban-rural gap. Now, what's striking from this chart? So, in other words, in this chart, we actually decompose total inequality simply into two parts rather than three parts. The red part actually have two parts. It's within rural and within urban. The blue part is the urban-rural inequality. And I want to highlight the importance of this rural-urban gap, which is actually common in developing countries, also in India, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, even in some developed countries like Italy. I know also they have certain sorts of degree of rural-urban inequalities. But what's striking here is what you could see is the top of the curve, like the mountain, is actually the profile of China's inequality since about 78, when the reform started. And the last year I have data here is about 2010. So you see that the China's inequality has been growing, and that's something many of us will know and already know. But what's less known is the composition of this inequality. If you look at this chart, basically more than 70% of China's inequality are due to urban-rural gap, not inequality within urban areas or inequality within rural areas. That's the first point. The second point, what you could see is in the very fast rise in China's inequality started in about late 1990s. Can you say that? And all the increases are due to urban-rural gap, not really within inequalities, right? So based on these 2 points, really, for China at least, and for many developing countries where you have fairly big, significant rural-urban gap, the very important thing for the government is really to tackle this urban-rural gap if you really want to work on this inequality issue or pursue inclusive growth strategy. But the trouble is, so next question is, how do we tackle the urban-rural gap? Now, we're seeing a lot of initiatives in India, and in China you have this rural employment guarantee program. China has this new socialist countryside program, and back in the history in Korea, they had some rural construction program, and so on and so on. But that's not something I agree. Now, whether this basically try to tackle this rural-urban gap, you have two options. But before I come to the two options, I want to just touch on this sort of couple of numbers. This morning I had to look quickly on the website, the urbanization rate of India. It's from CIA, which they actually have the latest number rather than ADBI or the World Bank. So 2015 estimate urbanization rate in India is 32.7%. And I also checked on the same website the GDP breakdowns. Agricultural GDP is about 17%. So if you roughly, take service and manufacturing as urban GDP, so this about 33% of the population really share about more than 80% of the GDP. Then, of course, you have the 67, almost 70% people living in rural areas, and they share a GDP of less than 20%, right? Now, in China, things a little bit better because China's urbanization rate is a bit higher at the moment, sits on just over 55%. And I know, because I'm a person working on the Chinese economy, the service manufacturing GDP adds up to about 90%. So again, do a similar, very rough. Of course, there are many things you can discuss, but roughly, we have about 55% people in the urban areas sharing about 90% of China's GDP. Then you have about 45% sharing 10% of GDP. Now, given this fact, anybody can tell me whether we can use transfer. That's a conventional wisdom to solve inequality problem. That's what I've been saying to many people all over the world. I've been saying to the Chinese government. How could you solve urban-rural gap by fiscal transfer? Because how much your government revenue is? 20%, 30% of GDP. Even with that, you got to spend, right? You got to spend. You got to keep your government alive first, right? That's going to take a lot. Then you got to education. You got to health. You got to very urban development as well, public service, and not mentioning you got to spend on defense and many other issues. Yeah. So you can't rely on fiscal option for developing countries, given the development status. Now, when they develop further, China is in a better position now than India to use fiscal transfers. But at a late, early development stage, you can't because you don't have the sufficient resources to do that. And of course, there's a competing demand for public expenditure, as I mentioned. So what I'm saying is, if you want to transfer resources, you see urban, rural, two parts of your country, and if you want to transfer resources between these two regions to solve inequality, that's not going to work. It's a simple mathematical problem. We don't have to argue. So the only other option I've been arguing is to move people. If you cannot, using move resources, you can move people. And what's moving people? It's migration and it's urbanization. Now, of course, that's not as simple as what we are saying. Moving people will solve the problem. It comes with a lot of problems. We know that. But as far as inequality is concerned, that's a chart I use based on the earlier, the model, mathematical equation, that based on China's data, you can actually see the relationship between urbanization and inequality. You saw that China's inequality going up to about 0.45 Gini coefficient. In India, I checked, the number I have is about 0.37, so actually China is facing a more serious inequality issue than India. But anyway, the point is that the relationship between inequality and urbanization by mathematics is a kind of inverted U shape. So in other words, it's not always the case when you push urbanization, you will get to a reduction in inequality, depending on where you are. But the point is that you cannot avoid this because urbanization will take place. It's a matter of sooner or later. So whether you're going to come across this picking point, right? Now we can, based on the earlier model, we can also actually look at the impact of urbanization on inequality. So these are the estimates using China's data, and you can see that in the early period, the impact, urbanization actually helps lead to higher inequality. So the impacts are positive. About 1995, urbanization started to actually lead to decreases in inequality. Yeah. And I don't really want to spend time on this sort of the actual numbers, but so urbanization inequality has an inverted U curve, and in some cases, urbanization may actually push up inequality. In other cases, may lead to decline in inequality. And where is the peak point? You remember we had this inverted yield curve, you can actually solve that mathematically. And here are the sort of the peak points at different times, different years. So if the urbanization rate passes through these points, urbanization will be beneficial for reducing inequality. But if your urbanization rate is below that rate, urbanization actually may lead to increasing inequality. So we put these two together, the peak point and the urbanization rate, and you can see that it actually crossed in about 1994 and 1995. And that's where you see this sort of declining inequality as urbanization proceeds for the case of China. So if we take what this simple, very quick sort of analytical results, basically we have two really policy implications for China and possibly for some other countries. One is you got to speed up urbanization in China, which will actually give you a win-win situation. So of course, we know that urbanization is good for growth. In Asia, for the whole region, urban productivity is about 3 to 5 times of rural productivity. So in general, given many other conditions, urbanization will lead to growth in efficiency, but also in China will actually lead to improvement in distribution. But the key issue is really to control within urban inequality. And what I'm trying to say here is really the government should pay much attention to helping the poor in the urban areas, and in particular for migrants. What I'm saying to the Chinese government is, don't spend so much on this, new countryside program or socialist countryside program. In India, I don't know whether you should invest so much in this, rural employment guarantee program. What they could do is actually take that fund and to help the migrants in the urban areas. I'm not saying, we should not help the poor, we should not help the rural people, but helping them not in rural areas, but in urban areas. So that's the message. Now, of course, urbanization is an issue more than sort of inequality. Urbanization comes with many other challenges. And the most important challenge related to urbanization is local and global pollution. And it could also increase vulnerability to disaster. I have some data, but I'm not going to show you